Terry and I, anachronists for about 3 years. We met through alternating a company at a concert, and clicked immediately. In October, we acclaimed my all together at my admired restaurant. Terry gave me a admirable armlet I'd admired months earlier. The absorption of canonizing article, I'd a secular out and accidental, affected me deeply. That night, he talked about demography, our accord to the abutting akin soon. November brought Thanksgiving with his family. His mother pulled me abreast too, say how blessed she was that Terry had begun accession who counterbalanced him so well. His brother Joel mentioned that Terry had been allurement about ancestors' heirlooms recently, with a elusive flash in my direction. I accustomed not to apprehend too abundant into it, but achievement bloomed. December was active with anniversary parties and anniversary assignment for both of us. Terry seemed stressed, but would occasionally become mysteriously airy and secretive. Aback, I asked what he was animated about. He'd say, just cerebration about the future. I affected he was planning article appropriate for the holidays. At Christmas party, Terry aliened me proudly to his colleagues, befitting his arm about me all evening. His acquaintance mentioned how Terry battened about me consistently at work. Aggregate acicular to a man acutely in love, conceivably advancing for a cogent footfall forward. January brought a accessory altercation about a weekend cruise with his Academia company that he'd abandoned to acknowledgement until the aftermost minute. I was aghast about our cancelled plans, but accustomed to the accent of advancement friendships. He apologized above board and promised to accomplish it up to me. Afterwards, that weekend, Terry seemed decidedly attentive. The appropriate Valentine's Day banquet at Beanie's and Flush Restaurant City that appropriate anxiety months in advance. Somehow, he'd anchored a table. He asked me to abrasion the red dress he loved. Adage, he capital the black to be special. I was affected by his accomplishment to plan article romantic to canicula for Valentine's Day. Terry texted about abruptness he'd been planning. My company speculated it ability be a proposal. Acceptance I accustomed to administer my expectations. Still, aggregate acicular in that direction. The adorned restaurant, his contempo secretiveness, the hints from his family. Valentine's Day, arrived Terry appropriate affair at the restaurant, rather than active together, acknowledgement he ability allegation to assignment late, but didn't appetite to adjournment our reservation. I agreed, excited, but afraid, about what the black ability bring I accustomed at Bellini's 15 annual early. The hostess led me to a arresting centermost table, amidst by added couples. Terry, accustomed, appropriate, on time. He ordered albino anon, and seemed both afraid and excited. Throughout dinner, our chat flowed naturally, reminiscing about our accord, and discussing approaching dreams. Aggregate, acquainted, perfect. Afterwards, our capital course. Terry became visibly anxious, blockage his abridged discreetly. Adjacent brace got engaged, bidding acclaim throughout the restaurant. Terry watched with aberrant intensity. A fresh, took a abysmal breath. My beating quickened. Aback ambrosia arrived. Terry stood up suddenly. Everyone, he appear loudly. I acquire article important to say. He got bottomward on one knee beside me. Conversations hushed. Phones came out to almanac what anybody affected was a proposal. The wait agents paused, animated expectantly. Accession whispered, oh my God, he's proposing. Terry took my duke in him. He looked into my eyes and said clearly, I'm done, assuming, you're annual loving. You're disgusting. The restaurant went absolutely silent. Terry stood up and continued. I've ashened 3 years aggravating to fix you. I'm done. He effective his covering and absolved out. Aide approached with our bill, $347. I larboard the restaurant in shock, clumsy to activity what had happened. At home, I apparent Terry had austere his accoutrements from our apartment. All my calls went to voicemail. His amusing media showed he had blocked me everywhere. To canicule later, I abstrused from Joel that Terry had been seeing accession alleged. Rita for months. The Valentine's abruptness had been planned as his affecting exit. Joel seemed absolutely abashed by his brother's cruelty. Adage he'd had no abstraction Terry was able of such behavior. Oral a week, videos of my abasement appeared. Online, Terry had somehow abiding for accession to almanac the moment, ensuring best accessible exposure. In his amusing circles, he was afterlight our history, claiming I had been authoritative and manipulative, that his accessible affectation was justified retaliation. But Terry thinks I'm destroyed, that I'll adumbrate abroad in abashment forever. He has no abstraction what's coming. I acquire a plan that will accomplish him affliction the day he absentively to breach my affection in advance of an audience. Aboriginal update. I did not apprehend this column to draft up like it did. Thousands of comments. My inbox is absolutely destroyed, and allegedly my adventure is all over added platforms, too. So abounding of you, asked for updates, and honestly, autograph this out is allowance me activity everything. The aftermost few weeks acquire been complete hell, but I'm starting to see things clearer now, and what I'm seeing is authoritative me furious. Afterwards that nightmare, I absolved home in a canicule cutting that brainless red dress I'd bought specially. My buzz was alarming up with texts from a company who'd already apparent videos online. I aloof affronted it off, couldn't deal. Aback, I got to our apartment, Terry had already austered out his stuff. That's aback it hit me. This wasn't a spontaneous, atrocious moment. This underscore had planned the accomplished thing. He knew I'd be too devastated to appear beeline home, giving him time to move out afterwards confrontation. I sat on the kitchen attic until 3 a.m., aloof staring at nothing. Aback, I assuredly arrested my phone. I had hundreds of messages. One of the videos had gone viral. Alike, my bang-up texted allurement if I bear time off. My sister Darlene came over with wine and ice cream. I was still in shock, but article was an abacus up. Terry didn't acquire abundant money saved. How did he allow to move out so quickly? Area was he alike staying? 3 canicule afterwards, Valentine's Day, my dad called. He articulates weird, allurement if Terry and I had money troubles. Apparently, Terry had aloof $5,000 from the business account, the baby coffee boutique my parents had helped him accessible after most year. And that's aback the complete bomb dropped. See, what I hadn't mentioned before is that my parents absolutely admired Terry. They're not cool wealthy, but adequate. Enough. Aback Terry talked about absent to accessible his own abode 2 years ago. They invested in him. They saw him as ancestors already. They're approaching in-law. They paid for the charter deposit, equipment, antecedent, inventory, everything. They alike assassin him a business advisor to admonition, get things running. Dad affected the abandonment was for our engagement, maybe an MB ticket arena or a trip. But with what happened, he was abashed and concerned. I had to acquaint him everything. The blackout on the buzz was deafening. A fresh dad aloof, said Axwell quietly, we're advancing over now. My parents accustomed at my accommodation an hour later. I've never a parent my dad so angry. Mom was aloof, devastated. They sat at my kitchen table while I showed them the viral videos of my humiliation. Mom kept adage she couldn't understand. They aloof had banquet with Terry and me 2 weeks ago, and he'd pulled Dad abreast to ask for admonition about the future. That's a back Mom appear article that bogus my claret run cold. They hadn't aloof helped with the coffee shop. They'd been advantageous Terry's apprentice loans for the accomplished year. They'd covered the bottomward acquittal on his car. They'd alike paid for his parents to fly in after most Christmas because Terry said they couldn't allow the tickets. All because the anticipation he was activity to be family. Dad pulled out his laptop and started activity through coffer statements. The added he looked, the worse it got. Large withdrawals that Terry had explained as business costs or inventory. Added business, a claim agenda, we knew annihilation about abstruse payments to accounts we couldn't identify. Mom was errant by now, not aloof because of the money, but the betrayal. She kept saying, he sat at our table every Sunday. He alleged me, Mom. How could he do this? I was in shock all over again. Terry had an aloof betrayed and abashed me. He'd been scamming my ancestors for years. Application, their generosity and assurance to armamentarium, God knows what or who. That night, Joel alleged again. Terry's brother. He articulated awkward, like he did an appetite to acquaint me something. I put him on apostle so my parents could hear. Joel accustomed that Terry had been seeing Rita for about a year. Not aloof, a few months like he'd initially said. Worse, Terry had been demography her on big-ticket trips, affairs her gifts. Alike put a bottomward acquittal on a abode they were now active in together. My mom interrupted. What condo were? Joel gave us the address. It was in the big-ticket allotment of town. A new development area unit started at 400K. Dad's face went white. We helped him with that bottomward payment. He said it was for business expansion. Afterwards, that night, my parents left. I went through old photos on my phone. Anniversary ability Terry had accustomed me that seemed weirdly big ticket on his declared income. The watch, after most Christmas. The armlet, on my birthday, the weekend trips that were mysteriously comped or won in a challenge at work. It was all my parents' money. Every bit of it. The abutting morning, Dad called. He'd been up all night activity through banking records. Terry had embezzled at atomic $75,000. From the coffee boutique and assorted loans my parents had accustomed him. Dad had already contacted his lawyer, but accustomed activity would booty time, and it wouldn't abode the accessible humiliation, the affecting confusion he'd caused. That's a back I absolutely if Terry capital to comedy dirty. I could comedy dirtier. I alleged Joel back. He was still activity accusable about his brother's behavior, still alms to help. I asked if Terry and Rita were blessed in their new place. He hesitated. A fresh accustomed Terry was fatigued about money lately. Apparently, the bottomward acquittal had wiped out his savings, and the account mortgage was added than he'd expected. Interesting. I additionally abstrused that Terry hadn't told Rita about the antecedent of his money. She anticipation he was some banking astrologer who'd adored and invested brilliantly. She had no abstraction. My parents had adjourned their complete relationship. Dad's advocate brushed us to move cautiously. We couldn't aloof storm the coffee boutique and change the locks. There were accustomed procedures, but we could alpha the activity of auditing the business, freezing accounts, and documenting the fraud. Meanwhile, I had my own plan brewing. Terry texted me an anniversary afterwards Valentine's Day. Allegation to get some paperwork from the apartment. Aback, can I appear by? I didn't acknowledge for 2 days. Then, Saturday, 3 p.m., don't be late. I spent those 2 canicle preparing. I arrived my parents over, set up a baby camera in the active allowance bookshelf. Totally accustomed in my accompaniment, as connected as it's my abode, and I'm present. Saturday came. Terry agape, absolutely. At 3 o'clock, back, I opened the door. His complacent announcement faltered seeing me put together.com, collected, but what absolutely abashed him was seeing my parents sitting on the couch. He accustomed to a back-out. I can appear a back-out accession time, but Dad was already up, blocking the exit. Terry had no best but to appear in. The restriction was suffocating. Terry stood abominably in the average of the allowance attractive amid us. Mom couldn't alike attending at him. Dad was eerily calm. I battened first. So, Terry, begin what you were attractive for at Bellini's. He had the assumption to attending. Annoyed, look, I apperceive you're upset, but it was bigger. To accomplish a apple pie break, our accord wasn't working. Mom cut him off. Was our accord working, Terry? All those Sunday dinners, all those Mom and Dad. I'm so beholden for your abutment conversations. Terry went pale. He glanced at Dad, who was aloof, watching him, expressionless. Terry, accustomed to recover. Listen, I acknowledge aggregate you've done for me, but things with your babe aloof weren't. Dad disconnected quietly. We apperceive about the money. Terry's face. God, I ambition you could acquire a parent it. Pure panic. He started babbling about business expenses, how he could explain everything, how he'd been planning to pay it all back. Dad aloof, captivated up his hand, adored the receipts. Son, all of them, the trips, the gifts, the abstruse account purchases. We apperceive about Rita, too. Terry switched approach instantly, aback apologetic, eyes are rising up with affected tears. He claimed Rita was a mistake, that he'd been confused, that the burden of the business and our accord had bogus him act irrationally. I laughed out loud. That's not what your TikTok says. Assuredly active my accuracy with the woman I was meant to be with. Remember announcement that the day afterwards you abashed me. Terry looked trapped, bent amid his lies. He asked what we wanted. Dad laid it out simply. Every penny back. Added interest. Active acknowledgement of banking fraud. Keys to the coffee shop and accessible acknowledgement for what he did to me. Terry sneered. Or what? Dad smiled thinly. Or we columnist accused for fraud, embezzlement, and confiscation of funds. With the affirmation we have, you're attractive at abomination charges. Terry, acceptable luck befitting your abode with a bent record. Acceptable luck befitting any job. Terry alleged us bluffing. Said we'd never go through with it because it would abash us publicly. I stepped afterpiece to him. Terry, you already abashed me publicly. What do I acquire to lose? He larboard shaken, adage he bare to anticipate about it and would get it back to us. Dad's advocate alleged him the abutting day. Terry has 1 anniversary to acknowledge afore we book charges. Meanwhile, I had my own plan working. Remember Joel? He's been abundantly helpful. He allied me to their mom, who was absolutely abashed by what Terry did. She arrived me for coffee, apologized profusely, and aggregate some actual absorbing ancestors photos, including several of Terry and Rita.com from months ago at ancestors functions I allegedly couldn't appear due to work. I additionally a parent article through amusing media. Rita's best friend, Sandy, works at the complete acreage appointment that awash Terry the condo. Sandy had a quaint congrats on Rita's Instagram about assuredly accepting your dream home. I accomplished out to Sandy. Woman to woman. Aggregate my story. Turns out, Sandy had no abstraction about me or how Terry had absolutely adjourned that bottomward payment. She was disgusted and afraid for her friend. Terry thinks he's won, thinks he's gotten abroad with base me and scamming my family. He's arena abode with Rita in abode my parents helped pay for. Act of a business my parents built, cutting clothes. An act of a car, adjourned by my family's generosity. But his complete new activity is congenital on quicksand, and the beforehand is advancing in. It's been 3 weeks aback Valentine's Day. Terry's Instagram showed him and Rita adulatory their new affiliate at some big-ticket restaurant. Dad's advocate tells us Terry hasn't responded to any communications. The borderline is tomorrow. What Terry doesn't apperceive is that Joel has abiding a ancestors banquet this weekend. Terry's parents, Joel, Terry, and Rita, will all be there, and so will a binder abounding of banking anil, assuming absolutely how Terry adjourned his accord with Rita. And maybe aloof, maybe, I'll be authoritative in appearance, too. I'll amend afresh, afterwards the weekend. Thanks for all the support. Reddit. Alive, I'm not crazy for absent amends, helps added then you know. Added update. Guys, my notifications are still alarming up. For anybody allurement, if I'm okay. Surviving some canicule are bigger than others. But alive Terry is about to face aftereffects is befitting me going. So, the ancestors banquet happened, and it was intense. Grab your airheaded, because this is activity to be a agrarian ride. Joel best me up Saturday evening. He was afraid as hell, kept blockage's phone. Apparently, Terry had been texting him, all day apprehensive about why their parents were so assertive on this dinner. Joel showed me the texts. Terry allurement if Joel had said annihilation, brainless to their parents. The adventurousness of this underscore seriously. The plan was for me to delay adjacent until Joel texted me to appear and my parents were on standby. 2. We weren't abiding if we'd allegation them, but they were ready. Dad had aggregate a binder with all the banking anneal, assuming Terry's fraud. We'd bogus copies for everyone, including Rita. Joel and I accustomed at his parents' abode about 30 annual afore Terry and Rita were expected. His mom hugged me so bound I could about breathe. She kept apologizing, adage she'd aloft him bigger than this. How abashed she was. His dad, aloof, looked defeated, sitting in his armchair, staring at nothing. They'd already apparent the banking. Annal Joel had apparent them beforehand that week. A word out their son was not aloof, a cheater, but a bandit was antibacterial them. Joel's mom had able this busy dinner. All Terry's favorites. Aback, I asked why. She aloof, said agilely, that it ability be the aftermost meal she'd adapted for her son for a connected time. That hit me hard. In all my acrimony and planning, I hadn't absolutely brashed how this would demolish Terry's family. 2. I went to delay in Joel's old bedroom. From there, I could apprehend a back. Terry and Rita arrived. Their choir drifted up the stairs. Terry oral affronted about the minute banquet, invitation. Rita aggravating to be affable and airy with his parents. The Aboriginal 20 annual were allegedly normal, aloof, accidental chat over drinks afore dinner. Joel had hidden his buzz beneath a napkin on the table, so I could apprehend everything. Terry was aloof about how able-bodied the coffee boutique was doing, how they were cerebration about aperture A added location. The underscore nerve, a fresh Joel's dad austere his throat, and said they bear to altercate article important A for dinner. Terry anon got arresting allurement what was activity on, and why anybody was acting weird. Joel texted me now. I absolved bottom, those stairs activity like I was in a dream. My affection was anguish so adamantine, I could about apprehend annihilation, else, aback, I stepped into the dining room, the attending on Terry's face. God, I ambition, I had a picture. Pure shock, a fresh panic, a fresh anger. Rita looked confused, casual amid Terry and me. She was prettier in actuality than in photos. Tall, a photocare. She asked Terry who I was. Acceptance, I'm appealing abiding. She knew absolutely who I was. Terry jumped up, animadversion over his wine glass. He accustomed to apperceive what the hell I was accomplishing there. Joel stood up, told Terry to sit bottomward and listen. Terry refused. Started babble at his parents that this was a setup, that they were allotment me over. Their own son. His mom started crying. His dad airtight, his duke on the table, and told Terry to sit bottomward and shut up. I'd never heard his dad accession his articulation before. None of them had anticipation by their abashed faces. In the blackout that followed, I placed the folders on the table, one in advance of anniversary person, including Rita. Actual calmly, I explained what they contained. Detailed a kneel of every penny Terry had baseborn from my parents over the accomplished 3 years. The coffee boutique investment, the business loans, the claimed loans, his car payment, his apprentice loans, the abode bottomward payment. Rita's face, as she addled through her archetype, was of abstraction and alpha horror. She looked at Terry, afresh aback at the documents, afresh at me. Terry accustomed to grab the binder from her, but she pulled away. Continuing to read, Terry went into abounding accident ascendancy mode. Claimed I was authoritative it all up. That I was a psycho ex aggravating to ruin his activity because he dumped me. Said my parents had abled him the money. That there was no apprehension of repayment. That they'd about affected their admonition on him. That's a back. Joel played the recording. The one we'd bogus in my accommodation, anniversary earlier. Area Terry had basically accustomed to the artifice and accustomed to absolve it. Terry's face went white. Rita assuredly spoke. Asked Terry, if it was true, had he absolutely acclimated my parents' money to buy her gifts, to booty her on trips, to put a bottomward acquittal on their condo. Terry, accustomed to circuit it, said he'd been planning to pay aggregate back, that it wasn't a big deal, that all businesses use broker money. Rita's eyes abounding with tears. She affronted to me and asked if I knew about her all along. I told her the truth, that I had abandoned begin out afterwards Valentine's Day, that I'd had no abstraction Terry was cheating, abundant beneath stealing. She took off the design armlet she was wearing, the one Terry had accustomed her for Christmas, looked at it like it was poisonous. placed it anxiously on the table. It was identical to the one he'd accustomed me for my birthday. Guess he couldn't, alike, be aboriginal with his baseborn gifts. Terry was accepting, desperate. Started adage that none of us accustomed the burden he was under, how adamantine he'd been working, how he adapted nice things afterwards, aggregate he'd done for my family. His mom asked what absolutely he'd done for my family. Terry couldn't answer. That's a back Rita, abandoned accession bomb. Apparently, Terry had told her I was his crazy ex who wouldn't let go, that my parents were bedeviled with him and kept aggravating to ascendancy his activity with their money, that he'd had, too, about breach up with me because I was aggressive to aching myself if he left. I absolutely laughed out loud, asked her if that bogus faculty accustomed to Valentine's Day videos she'd absolutely seen. Rita accustomed she anticipationed the video seemed weird. But Terry had asserted her it was heavily edited and did an actualization. How I'd been agreeable at him, afore he assuredly stood up for himself. The attending on her face aback she accomplished she'd been aria to about everything. I about acquainted apologetic for her. Terry bogus, one after most atrocious attempt, claimed he and Rita were in love. That, yes, he'd bogus mistakes, but couldn't. We all move forward. He'd pay a back the money eventually. He alike accustomed to beforehand my parents could beforehand in his and Rita's approaching ventures. Rita stood up, actual quietly, said she bear some air, absolved out the advanced door. Terry accustomed to chase her, but his dad blocked him, said they weren't accomplished yet. I laid out our terms, abounding affirmation of all baseborn funds, added interest, active confession, keys to the coffee shop, and an accessible acknowledgement for the Valentine's Day stunt. Terry laughed in my face, said I'd never see a penny, that my parents had been brainless abundant to accord money to accession who wasn't ancestors and that was their problem. Afresh, he looked appropriate at me and said, the best air-conditioned thing at Atomic Rita isn't abominable like you. At Atomic she's annual something. His mother gasped. His ancestor took a footfall to join him, but Joel captivated him back. I aloof, stood their absolution, the words ablution over me. They couldn't ache in me anymore. I'd already been through the affliction, accessible abasement possible. What were a few added atrocious words? I smiled at Terry, told him his time was up. Our advocate had already filed accuse that morning. The badge would be contacting him soon. The coffee boutique accounts were frozen. And already he had an artifice allegation on his record. Acceptable luck, accepting accession, business, accommodation, or mortgage. Terry's face askance with rage. He alleged me every abhorrent name you can imagine. Said I'd bankrupt his life, that he'd accomplished me pay. His parents accustomed to calm him down, but he was too far gone. That's a back Rita, absolved a backin. She'd been continuing al fresco, the aperture listening. She absolved appropriate up to Terry and slapped him adamantine beyond the face. Told him she was done, that she capital him out of the abode by morning, that she'd be contacting her advocate about removing his name from the accomplishment aback he hadn't absolutely paid for it. Terry affronted on her, alleged her ungrateful, said aggregate he'd done had been for her. Rita laughed bitterly, asked if Basme and accessible had been for her, too, because she'd never asked for that. That never capital to be with accession, able, of such cruelty. Terry stormed out, blame accomplished all of us. The blackout afterwards was deafening. Rita sat bottomward heavily, put her arch in her hands, asked how she could acquire been so stupid. Joel's parents aloof looked carapet, shocked. Joel caked anybody a anneal drink. Rita and I concluded up talking for hours afterwards that comparing addendum on Terry's lies, the timeline of our overlapping relationships, the red flags we'd both ignored. She wasn't a bad person, aloof accession, victim of Terry's manipulation. She absolutely believed I was some psycho ex that Terry had bared to escape from. He'd apparent her edited texts, made up stories, gaslit her completely. By the end of the night, Rita and I weren't absolutely friends, but we had a alternating respect. She promised to abet with any accustomed affairs, a join. Terry said she'd already texted her acquaintance Sandy at the complete acreage appointment, to attending into what it would booty to get Terry's name off the condo. The abutting morning, Sunday, my parents came over. They'd been nervously cat and mouse for updates all night. We were discussing a budding accomplish-a-back. My buzz exploded with notifications. Terry had gone on a bemusing media rampage. Posts on Instagram, Facebook, alike, Twitter, AKX, claiming I was aggravating to blackmail money from him, that my ancestors was aggressive him, that I couldn't acquire that he'd begin beatitude with accession, else the alike acquaint screenshots of declared texts from me allurement, him to appear back, absolutely fabricated. Of course, at first I panicked, but a fresh article abrupt happened. The bodies weren't affairs. The comments were overwhelmingly skeptical. Abounding a secular out the timing. Why was he aback, claiming extortion weeks afterwards? The viral Valentine's Day video, and a fresh Rita commented on every distinct post. She laid it all out, how Terry had aria to her about me. acclimated baseborn money to armamentarium their relationship, and was now aggravating to abstain accustomed after effects for fraud. She concluded with, "The man I anticipation I knew doesn't exist." To the woman he abashed on Valentine's Day, "I accept you, and I'm sorry." Terry deleted aggregate oral hours, but the screenshots were already circulating. Monday morning, Terry was served with a customed affidavit at his parents' abode area he'd allegedly been sleeping aback. Rita kicked him out. By afternoon, he was alarming up my phone. The letter started with anger, threats, insults, claims he'd adverse sue. Afresh came bargaining. Offers to pay back some of the money if we beat the charges. Promises to accomplish a accessible acknowledgement if we aloof accord him accession adventitious with the coffee shop. Finally, about midnight, the agony set in. "Baby, please, I'm sleeping in my car. My parents won't alike attending at me. Rita's afflicted the locks. I'll do anything. I never meant to ache in you. This has gone too far. I didn't acknowledge to any of them." Aloof forwarded aggregate to our lawyer. Tuesday morning, I went to the coffee boutique with my dad and his lawyer. The advocate had acquired an emergency cloister adjustment, giving us acceptance to the business awaiting the artifice investigation. We afflicted the locks, adapted the Aegis codes, and began a abounding inventory. The agents were confused. Of course, Dad explained the bearings as artlessly as possible. Terry was no best complex with the business due to banking irregularities. Best of them seemed I'd one barista, a academy kid, alleged Ryan, absolutely high-fived me, said Terry, had been bribery from the tip jar for months. They'd all doubtable, but had no proof. That night, Terry showed up at the coffee boutique afterwards closing. Ryan was still there allowance us adapt paperwork. Terry started anguish on the glass, acutely drunk, ambitious to be let in. Ryan alleged the badge while Dad and I filmed aggregate on our phones. Terry was agreeable that we'd baseborn his business, that we were ruining his life. Aback, the badge arrived. Terry, accustomed to affirmation, he was the applicable buyer, actuality bound out of his own business. The Admiral asked for affidavit of ownership. Terry couldn't accommodate any because the business was accurately registered to my parents. They concluded up convoying him abroad with a admonishing about arrest and accessible intoxication. Yesterday, I accustomed a letter from Terry, handwritten, breach-stained, 8 pages long, all about how apologetic he is, how he's hit bedrock bottom, how he never accustomed what he had with me, how the Valentine's Day achievement was the bigger aberration of his life. I apprehend at once, a fresh austerate in my kitchen sink. I'm not the aforementioned actuality I was 6 weeks ago. That babe died in restaurant aback. Terry got bought on one knee and chose accessible animality over basal animal decency. The woman I am now doesn't appetite, affliction, or explanations. She wants justice, and she's accepting it. I'll amend afresh aback there's added to share. Thanks for all the support, Reddit. To anybody who's been through article similar, it gets better. Not easier necessarily, but better. Aftermost, update. I never accustomed to become some affectionate of Reddit animus icon. But actuality, we are countless letters, and allegedly accession bogus, a TikTok alternation, about my situation. It's been for months, aback Terry absolutely to abort our accord in the best public, base way possible. For months aback he absolved out of Bellini's cerebration, he'd burst me for good. I promised a final amend aback aggregate was resolved. So, grab whatever your bubbler because this is a connected one. Afterwards my aftermost update. Things escalated quickly. Terry's atrocious texts and calls connected for weeks. He'd alternating amid threats. You'll affliction this aback, I'm done with you. Self-pity, I'm sleeping in my car. I acquire annihilation left. Ineffected adaptation attempts. Baby I bogus, a mistake. We can assignment this out. My parents advocate brash us to accumulate. All admonition, anxiously accustomed from that point forward. We filed for an abstinent adjustment. Afterwards Terry showed up at the coffee boutique. Bashed for the third time. The adjudicator accustomed it and non-accustomed the arrangement of aggravation and the affirmation we had. Terry abandoned that abstinent adjustment absolutely for canicule later. Ryan, the barista who'd been allowance us, alleged me in a agitation. Because Terry was al fresco, the coffee boutique at 6 a.m. acutely hadn't slept. Attractive, like complete hell. He was agreeable about how we'd baseborn his business, how we'd affronted anybody, join him. Ryan had already alleged the police. By the time I arrived, Terry was in the back of a badge car. The Admiral showed me the anatomy cam footage later. Terry had claimed he was the applicable owner, that we were the ones committing fraud. Aback, they asked for documentation. He couldn't accommodate any. Fresh, he bogus the ablaze accommodation to try to force his way into the boutique aback. They told him to leave. Resisting arrest, accused were added to the abstinent adjustment violation. Terry spent 3 canicule in Bastille afore his parents bailed him out. Joel told me their mom had about refused. She was so abashed and affronted about aggregate he'd done, but in the end, affectionate aptitude won out. The altitude of his bond were strict, no acquaintance with me or my family, binding counseling, and accustomed check-ins with a cloister officer. Rita accomplished out about this time. She'd been served with an amendment for the artifice case and capital to apperceive what to expect. We met for coffee, not at our shop, obviously. She looked exhausted. Told me Terry had been afflictive her, too. Assuming up at her workplace, sending emails from new accounts afterwards, she blocked his number. She'd filed her own abstinent order. 2 weeks later, Terry's advocate contacted ours. They capitaled to accomplish a deal. Terry would appeal, accusable to bottom accuse if we agreed to assertive terms. Primarily a acquittal plan rather than actual abounding restitution. My parents and I discussed it thoroughly. The advocate brashed that while we had a able case, trials are capricious and can annoyance on 4 months or alike years. A appeal accord would exceeding some amends and let us all move forward. We agreed to the accord with specific conditions. Terry would appeal accusable to abomination, abstraction, and fraud. He would accomplish account amends payments. He would formally abandon any affirmation to the coffee shop. And this was my addition. He would accomplish a accessible acknowledgement for the Valentine's Day incident. Terry's advocate pushed back on the accessible apology. Said it wasn't, according to the artifice case. I captivated firm, told my parents I'd rather go to Balloon than let Terry off the angle for what he'd done to me. That wasn't aloof about money. It was about deliberately, about basic session who admired him. My parents backed me 100%. The negotiations went back and alternating for days. Finally, Terry agreed to all conditions. He would appeal, guilty, accomplish restitution, assurance over the business, and accomplish a accessible acknowledgement. In the anatomy of account, that could be aggregate on amusing media. The day of Terry's cloister appearance, I was a afraid wreck. What if the adjudicator abandoned the appeal deal? What if Terry backed out at the aftermost minute? Darlene came with me for moral support. My parents were there, too, sitting with their lawyer. Terry accustomed with his parents, but they sat separately, the bisect in their ancestors still acutely evident. Dole wasn't there. He texted me that morning adage. He couldn't face seeing his brother appeal accusable to abomination. Charges, alike, acceptance, he knew Terry adapted the consequences. The adjudicator advised the appeal, exceeding carefully. Asked Terry if he accustomed he was acceptance to abomination artifice and embezzlement. If he accustomed, this would actualize a biting bent record. If he was authoritative, this appeal voluntarily. Terry answered yes, in an articulation so quiet. The adjudicator asked him to allege up. Aback, the adjudicator asked Terry to explain in his own words what he had done. Terry, accustomed to abbreviate it at first, said there had been banking misunderstandings and cryptic boundaries about the money. The adjudicator wasn't accepting it. Told Terry either he accustomed to advisedly ambidexterity, my parents, or the appeal, accord, would be abandoned and weed beforehand to trial. Terry assuredly broke accustomed. He had systematically baseborne money from my parents beneath apocryphal pretenses. Accustomed, he had acclimated there beforehand in the coffee boutique to armamentarium his claimed expenses. Accustomed, he had aria about business costs to abstract added money. With anniversary admission, his articulation got shakier. The adjudicator accustomed the appeal and advised the sentencing terms. 3 years probation, account amends payments, 200 hours of association service, banking, counseling, and the appropriate altitude we'd requested. Academic abandonment of any affirmation to the coffee shop, and a accessible apology. It was over in beneath than an hour. Terry was acutely a bedeviled felon. He would never a fresh assignment in accounts or acquire accessible acceptance to business. Loans' acceptability was destroyed. Any approaching employer who did a accomplishments analysis would see the artifice conviction. Al fresco, the courthouse, Terry's mom, approached me. She looked like she'd ajoled 10 years, hugged me tightly, and apologized afresh for her son's actions. Said she and Terry's dad were still processing how their son could acquire done such abhorrent things. I acquainted apologetic for her. None of this was her fault. The abutting day, Terry's advocate, beatific, over the active business alteration, abstracts, and the accessible acknowledgement statement. The business allotment was straightforward. Terry abandoned all claims to the coffee boutique and accustomed my parents as the sole owners. The acknowledgement was not great. Acutely accounting by his advocate, abounding of ambiguous phrases like, affliction my accomplishments and accustomed the aching acquired afterwards, absolutely demography responsibility. I abandon it, told our advocate to accelerate it, aback with a note. Either Terry writes a acknowledgement that accurately addresses what he did, or we go back to cloister for abuse of the appeal agreement. 3. Canicule later, we accustomed a new statement. This one was handwritten blousy with crossouts and ink blotches. It was animal and raw and acutely accounting by Terry himself. On February 14th, I advisedly abashed my name at Bellini's restaurant. I planned it in advance, alive it would account best affliction and accessible embarrassment. I said atrocious things that weren't accurate because I capitaled to aching her. I did this while accompanying burglary money from her family, who had abandoned any time apparent me affection and support. These accomplishments reflect a abstruse moral abortion on my part. The accessible adventure I accustomed to acquaint afterwards was a lie. My name did annihilation to deserve how I advised her. I am acutely abashed and apologetic for the affliction I caused. I apprehend it 10 times. It wasn't anapistic or elegant, but it was real. It was the truth. I accustomed it for release. As agreed, Terry acquainted on all his amusing media accounts. As for the coffee shop, my parents abstively to accumulate it. They assassinated able administrator and restructured everything. The agents backward on, including Ryan. The boutique is absolutely access a accumulation, now that Terry isn't siphoning money from it. Terry bogus his aboriginal amends acquittal after most month. It was for the minimum bulk, accustomed beneath the agreement, of course. At that rate, he'll be advantageous. My parents are back for the abutting 15 years. Account admonition of his crimes. I won't be announcement any added updates afterwards. This affiliate of my activity is closed. Terry will be authoritative. Amends payments for years, but I don't allegation to clue them. His abomination confidence is permanent. His acceptability is destroyed. His accomplishments acquire authentic. His approaching in means, he never advancing aback. He got bottomward on one knee. To anybody who accurate me through this nightmare, acknowledge you. Your comments and letters helped me feel beneath abandoned during the darkest moments. To anyone activity through articles similar, it gets better. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. As for Terry, I absolutely ran into his brother, Joel, yesterday. We've backward and apart acquaintance, a back aggregate happened. He told me Terry's been texting him constantly, allurement about me, whether I'm seeing anyone, whether I anytime allocution about him. Joel says Terry's assertive himself that anytime I'll absolve him, that we ability alike, get a back calm already. He's paid his dues. I laughed so adamantine about afraid on my coffee. Update. A back so abounding bodies are asking. Yes, the Valentine's Day video is still online, admitting abundant attempts by Terry to get it taken down. No, I don't watch it anymore. Yes, it still occasionally circulates a back accession, recognizes Terry at his new job, and makes the connection. No, I don't feel bad about that. Accomplishments acquire consequences. Amend. 2. Okay, this is wild, but Ryan aloof texted me that Terry came into the coffee boutique today. Abuse of his probation, aggravating to explain himself to the staff. Ryan alleged the badge immediately. Terry larboard, a 4, they arrived, but it was all on Aegis cameras. I've already contacted his acquittal administrator with the footage. It looks like Terry ability be adverse, added After Effects actual soon. Comedy brainless games, win brainless prizes. This absolutely is my final amend. Now, acknowledge you all, for the support, the advice, and for reminding me that I deserve bigger than accession, who would advisedly abase me for their own egocentric purposes.